it costs as much to build a garage as it is to build a living room.
Right.
And garages are ginormous. They're, I don't
Yeah.
know, roughly 10 by 20 feet per car, let's say. That's 200 square feet per car. That's ridiculous.
Yes.
The stall for a car is bigger than the room that we built for our children. And
Mm.
and
Oh,
and and we have to pay for that. And it's ridiculous.
This is Lived In, a podcast by Hemby Home Company in association with Haystack Realty Group in Greenville, North Carolina. Lived In exists to host thought-provoking discussions on design and real estate, empowering everyday home dwellers to live beautifully regardless of budget or circumstance. Every 2 weeks, join me, your host Femi Koz, a realtor, design advisor and content manager, as we cover everything from how to effectively conduct a home search to which rooms are worth the investment in your home. Together, let's find out what it really takes to live beautifully. This season, we're hosting interviews with experts, putting the keys in your hand as you make some of the most important decisions that come with creating a beautiful place to live. I've missed you guys, and this week, because we took a week off for Thanksgiving and 2 weeks from today will be Christmas, we're releasing a two-parter. Throughout this season, I've connected you with experts around issues like houseplants, mortgages, appraisals, tile installs, and healthy design. And in this week's episode, you'll hear from Toby Witte, who is an architect in every way but name only, and is the author of the book Supersizing Bliss, released in February of 2023. Toby and I talked about the need to demand more from our homes, how home design has gone backwards, not forwards, and why size isn't everything. And our conversation took so long that I had to split it in two. Last week you heard part one, and this week it's part two. Go ahead, get comfortable, and tune in for my interview with Toby Witte.
I want to get into building because, okay, so we've spoken about what kind of we shouldn't be in. What should we be asking of our homes? What should those be like?
Yes. So um, in the there's so many pieces to it. In the book, I was trying to kind of pinpoint a few things, and the things I talk about there are in part in reference, of course, by starting from scratch.
Yes.
But still, I think this can be certainly applied to existing homes that you move into or rent, and then and have to find solutions for. But I talk about one is structure,
Yes.
how showcasing, exposing the structure and play with it, that it has. They talk about texture, that just a change of materiality, of color,
Yes. These are the stepping
that it
stones of bliss. Well, I don't
those
know
are
if
the
that's what you
stepping
call them.
stones.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It makes a difference. I talk about natural light, how to play with the natural light, and have that a piece of the what surrounds you. And then
Yes.
the last thing I can't remember, to be honest.
So you've got structure, space, texture, light, and shadow.
Very good. Opening my own book here. Um,
Page 74, if that
there
helps.
you go. So, right. And yes, space, and all of those things are really in an effort to create a space. And the space is sort of what all of these pieces, all of these physical attributes, the pieces, the bits and pieces, they create sort of this void that we then inhabit. And the
Right.
bits and pieces, if you will, paint the music of that space. And so it's really, ephemeral kind of thing. You just either it's a tight space or it's an open space. Either it is a light-filled space or a dark space. Either you feel happy in there or sad or anxious. It's when you have a fire pit and you sit around there, it
Yes.
creates a space right then and there. So that's what we're want to concentrate on and pay attention to. And there's of course a million other pieces, but I think those are the strong pieces that when you pay attention to those, you can make a great difference. For
Yes.
instance, I mean, if you have a room, so if you don't design something from scratch, but you buy a home or you rent something, if you paint one surface, a certain color.
Yes.
If you actually open up your windows and you can't widen the windows in an existing
No.
house without
Right.
sort of changing it, but you can use um, window treatments to give that effect. And so where
Right.
you actually make the window feel like it goes from the floor to the ceiling and you're letting
Yes.
light in, you let that light ripple on something else. And so then you are talking about um, whatever, a blanket. What is your couch? What material is it made of? And what kind of blanket have you thrown over it? And where do you place it so that that light then ripples over that and invites you in and says, Femi, I'm waiting for you. Come here, sit down. We want to read a book
Yes.
now, have a drink, relax, forget about work. That's what I'm here for. You can create that with just a
Yes.
couch, a blanket, a window treatment, a bucket of paint on one wall that's adjacent to it. It makes a huge difference.
Yes, it does. So let's talk about your house because you mentioned it briefly a few minutes ago. But you shared, and I'm going to read the quote. You shared what your wife's request was when you were designing your house, and it was to allow us to feel as a family that is closely knit.
Oh, yeah,
And
talking about
yes,
goosebumps.
yes, literally, I'm having them. That line made me weep because I just thought about the fact that we don't recognize how the environments in which we are in shape the way we behave and we feel, which is the argument that you were making for bad design.
Oh,
And I think
yes.
if you were to ask the average person, not your wife, obviously, because she knew exactly what she was asking for, but if you were to ask the average person, what do you want our house to be like? They would say, I want enough space. I want to make sure we have room for blah, 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 and blah.
Yes.
And the goal is not necessarily the feel of the space or the way it enhances your life.
Yes.
And it was interesting because I was telling my husband actually earlier today that we were having this phone call, and I think your house is 1,500 square feet ish.
1700.
1,700.
1710.
1,710 square feet.
Yeah.
And I have four children. They are young, and I was saying to him, can you imagine us in 1,700 square feet? Just a house that's about
Uh-huh.
500 to 700 feet smaller than our house. And he was like, oh gosh. And
Yeah.
I understand the appeal. What's funny is I grew up in England. In England, houses are a lot smaller. I grew up in a terraced home for the first few years of my life and then a semi-detached house. Houses are a lot smaller in England in general than they are in the US. And so you get used to that. But he was like, well, how? And I said, well, his daughters all had rooms. And I would love for
Huge,
you to share
big rooms.
the layout there and kind of that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I was like, well, they had four bedrooms in their house in 1,700 square feet. And I don't think that feeling claustrophobic was a
Yeah.
was a thing for them. So I would love if you could share kind of what the footprint
Yeah.
of your house, what the rooms are, how you divided up the space and allocated space to certain rooms. I'd love to hear that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, claustrophobic is quite the opposite. I mean, our home feels spacious and huge and big and luxurious. And with three daughters, we have teenage daughters. And so, with that comes the need for privacy at certain times and the need
Yes.
of being mad at each other and having a place to escape to. And we got all of that in 1,700 square feet.
So
And so,
tell us
yeah,
your secrets.
yeah, so it's a two-story home, and the upstairs is just for the three daughters, and they have three rooms, and they're big. They're like 15 by 12 feet each room.
Yep. Yeah, that is
And
generous.
they're set up, and they have big windows from floor to ceiling. And when you have a window, and so we provided a window like that on three sides of each room. And so
Yes.
if you just imagine this, if you have a window on three sides of your room and it goes from floor to ceiling, that
Yes.
room becomes really open and freeing. You're not encapsulated in this little prison cell, but rather you're looking outside and you have the entire nature next to you. The square feet is really five times as big because the entire
Right.
side yard, everything is part, the sky, everything is part of your living environment. And then we arrange those three rooms in sort of a flower petal kind of thing. They're kind of connecting with their doors on a
Yes.
very small little, not even a hallway. It's just this little, I think it's called a pistil in the flower design, the center, right? There's three
Yes.
doors, three rooms that kind of shoot out from each other. And so what that means is and these big windows there are on the opposite corners. And so when you're in the room without any window treatment, you have total privacy.
Yep.
But when you go into the very corner, you can kind of glimpse into the corner of your sister's room. And so
Yes.
what happens that you always know that they're there. They're always there and they have your back. When you have a fight and you run into your room and you slam the
Yes.
door, and then you see the light go on in your sister's rooms, I mean, you can be mad and still love each other. You get, and
Yes.
so, and they really had those years together, and they're a tight bunch. They're an incredible tight bunch. And the first
Yeah.
one moved out, the next one is about to move out, and they're so incredibly, they love each other, they need each other, and they depend on each other. And then
Yes.
the downstairs is really a sort of a loft design, if you will. It's open, it's a big open sort of layout, but that is structured around an exposed brick wall. And
Yes.
so it's not one big open space. It's several spaces that kind of go around that brick wall. And so there's niches and corners,
Yes.
there are pockets, but each of these areas lend square feet to each other. And so our dining room is the dining room when we eat. When we
Yes.
get up, half of it is really half of the living room or half of the kitchen.
Right.
Um, and so that space though becomes a space where they can go down and suddenly downstairs, and we meet up there. We have dinner together, and so it's like this stage now that we come together and we have to interact with each other and figure out a way to be together.
Yes.
And so these spaces allow for these different moments. You have to be by yourself. You have to be mad at each other. You have to love each other. You have to congregate and be together, and all of that. So each space allows for that to happen, and it gets just the square feet it needs. And again, these spaces lend square feet to each other.
Yes.
Even our
I love that
uh,
language.
even our main bedroom for my wife and I is separated from the rest of the loft-like living space by two huge sliding panels that again go from floor to ceiling. And so
Yes.
at night we close them off. We essentially take a portion of the living room, it becomes our bedroom, and we have complete privacy. And then during the days we open those up, and now the bedroom becomes part of the living space downstairs. But because it's around the corner,
Yes.
it's not, the bed is not in your face. And even when we
Right.
have guests over, it's not like we have guests in our bedroom, but still, because the spaces keep going around corners, and sidelines are provided. So when you walk into the house, you look straight out of a window on the other end. So
Mm,
it feels big and spacious and open. Wherever you are, you're not closed in, but you're free and open. And there's just a place for a couch, a place to prepare a meal, a place to sit
yes.
down and have a dinner. Yeah.
It almost feels as though we have gotten lazy in terms of how we think about a house, and that in order for a room to be a room, it needs to have all the four walls, and it needs to be completely separate from any other room.
Yeah.
Where in
And it becomes,
reality, yes, there are rooms that never get used that way.
yeah.
I mean, we
And
as a family, we eat our breakfast, we eat if the kids are home lunch, and we eat our dinner. We actually eat at our dining table. We're one of those families who eats every meal around the table, and that's our time that we check in and we connect
yes,
and we nag the children to put food in their mouths instead of just staring
yes.
blankly into space. But we actually use it. But it's also not a separate room in our house. It's still very much connected to our living room. Again, I live in
Yeah.
suburbia. I live in um, a very unexciting house, and that has forced us to be creative in terms of how we furnish and how we design around how we live. And so that there is that challenge there. But I think we have gotten lazy in terms of, if we are picking a space, it was funny what you said about, you build the garage and then you build a 2-car garage, and then we're so ingenious, we put a room on top of the garage and now it's a bonus room. And
Yeah.
it's kind of hilarious that we have that, and then we end up with all these rooms and all these spaces that aren't used enough. And so
Yes.
we have to be, well, I can't say we have to be, I think we ought to be
Yeah.
more willing to be experimental, more willing to be flexible,
Oh,
to allow things to have
yeah.
multiple uses. I
There are
also just
two.
think, oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry. Just there's so many things coming to my
I
head
know.
that, but maybe just two. One was, there's people say that, right? When we have guests over, we always end up in the kitchen. Well,
Yes.
it's for a reason. And so why don't we then design our communal space, public space around the
Right.
kitchen then, and make it part of, bring that richness there and make it now usable for multiple people to hang out and not step on each other's toes. The other thing with the garage, it costs as much to build a garage as it is to build a living room.
Right.
And garages are ginormous. They're, I don't
Yeah.
know, roughly 10 by 20 feet per car, let's say. That's 200 square feet per car. That's ridiculous.
Yes.
The stall for a car is bigger than the room that we built for our children. And
Mm.
and
Oh,
and and we have to pay for that. And it's ridiculous. And when you think about it, cars are actually made to sit in the weather. They're better, technologically better designed and built than our homes to withstand the weather. And
right.
yet we build a crappy cardboard box around him to park him at night. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
So if you have the money to do that with such a ridiculous thing, sure, go ahead. But if you don't bother. Don't waste your money on those garages that, let's face it, we just end up using them as storage anyways in our cars
Right.
driveway. Then use that money instead to make those spaces that you actually inhabit that much better.
Yes. And let's talk about that, because one of the challenges is that we live in a framework, and I could talk to you for hours based on your book, because I genuinely, there's so much, but I have to make it condensed. But
Mhm.
I I think you do a really good job of introducing some of, or explaining, highlighting some of the narratives that kind of feed into the way our houses are. And one of them is, the fact that we are taught that house ownership is wealth building, and I think it can be, but I think that that has almost been sold as its own American dream. And then you've also talked about the fact that because house building is wealth building, or house ownership is wealth building, we are very keen, we're very focused on resale. Well, how do you know what your house is worth? It's based on the square footage. And so you kind of start there, and then you pull us into this other paradigm, and you essentially say size isn't everything. You kind of say, actually, let me find the quote, because I think you say it so well. But you essentially say that a you talk about a Maserati and a school bus. So yes,
Oh,
you say that, let me find the quote actually, because in the book you say it much better even than my notes do. But it's this idea that everyone has their, I'll read your text. Everyone has their budget, a specific amount that they can spend. That amount should be honored. The question becomes what you want to spend it on. And you say, you pose this hypothetical of talking to a client, or you say it's a conversation that you've had in some shape or form, where you say to the client, you have come to me because you want a Maserati, and yet you're comparing it to a school bus. I was like,
yes.
this is incredible. But it's true. I think we prioritize, and in some ways, again, I love America. I love America so much, and I love all of my American friends, and I love everybody. But in some ways, I also think that's the American dream, or the American goal is like, bigger is better. Bigger is always better, but bigger isn't always better. Bigger could be bigger and crappier, or it's a more terrible.
Yes.
It's a more terrible. It's terrible language, but it's not good quality compared to something that is smaller. And that's kind of the way I feel. I shared, I think, on the podcast last season that there was a video I watched on YouTube, and it was this, she's an influencer, and she says that she loved her house and it had this great soul to it.
Mm.
And I think it was a pre-war pre-war or just post-war apartment in New York. Really nice, got tons of history. And I thought to myself, in 100 years, when people look at our houses, are they going to go, "Oh, I just love this house that just has so much soul"? Probably
No,
not. They're
no,
bigger. Yeah, the
yes,
houses are bigger, but I think we've kind of lost our way. So with all of
yeah.
that said, I would love for you to kind of share, where do you think our focus should be in terms of finance if it's not on square footage? When we're investing in building our homes, where should that money go?
Yeah, I don't, that's actually a great question because it's sort of like if we can't measure the value of our house anymore with the by square feet, then what should we
Yes.
measured by? And that's actually a great question. I probably should find an answer. In the book, I think I probably quib saying that if we stoop so low by getting a measuring tape out, we should measure the size of our smile.
You do
And
say that, and I think that yes, yes,
yes, so I don't know concretely how to make this an industry standard, if you will, but if you know when you hold a iPhone, sorry, a smartphone to make it
more
so
inclusive.
more inclusive, if you hold a smartphone in one hand and one of those crank phones from 50, 60, 80 years ago or whatever, where you whatever called the operator on, uh,
Yes,
and the other hand, you know which one is better and why you would spend $1,000 on one and 50 cent on the other.
right.
And so I think we have to come to a point where we can recognize the difference. And I've in the that little story about the school bus and the Maserati is fun because it is so relatable. And I was trying to find out how much it cost to buy a school bus, and there's like no prices out there. I feel like there's a whole industry and lobbyists behind all of that. I don't know how that works,
Yes,
but I could eventually I figured it out. And so you can it's literally the same price, like two hundred fifty
yes,
thousand dollars. You can buy a school bus or you can buy this expensive sports car. And when your interest is not carting around 50 kids, but rather it's you and your hubby, and you
yes,
want to have a beautiful afternoon, we go for the school bus as far as our homes are concerned, day in,
yes. Instead of
out, and
yeah,
that's the sense. Why would you do
yes,
that? And you know the difference. If we want to go drive to the beach and have a picnic and a beautiful day and enjoy whatever the driving experience while we drive there, there's no way we would pick the school bus. Never, not in a million years.
yeah.
And with our homes, that's what we do.
So yes, and the thing that you do end up kind of saying and boiling it down to in the book, which I know is not as tangible, but you essentially say that we should ask for more richness with the same budget. So
Yes.
versus saying, okay, I have, think about house prices here, I have $750,000, I can build or buy a 3,000 or 3,500 square foot house.
Yeah.
Instead of saying that, you're saying take that 750,000, build a smaller house that
Yes.
is of that not just of great quality, but that actually enhances your well-being and your day-to-day life.
Yes.
And I
Exactly
love
right.
that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I did go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. I just spend the same money. It is your budget. That's what you can
Right.
afford. The banks tell you right now, well, we need more you need to find something cheaper with more square feet for us to give that amount to you.
Yes.
But there's no reason for them to say, oh, no, we give you the same amount for half the square feet. So for a higher
Right.
square foot price. Because we as a bank, we see the value in this. And unfortunately, the bank says the only thing we can look at these days is square feet. Sorry.
But it's
Um,
funny because they don't do that. They already don't do that because what will happen is they just esteem certain things higher than others. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm
yeah,
thinking about the fact that, okay, my house in Greenville, North Carolina, let's say it's 300,000, but my same house in California is 750,000.
yes,
And the reason for that is because they're pricing the land. The land is
yes,
more valuable. So I don't understand really why it, it I mean, I understand that it is, but I don't understand really if push came to shove, and obviously the people in the banks are not the people making the decisions. But I don't understand why they can't look at a property and say, this property is exceptional.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm
Yes.
going to ascribe this value to it, because they already do that with land.
Exactly right. And the truth of the matter is that any of my clients, when if they were to turn around and put their house on the market right away, there would be
Yes.
lines down the streets and they would
Yes.
be bidding themselves out. I occasionally I've built a few homes myself as spec homes and sold them. And that was the
Yes.
case. I mean, there's literally lines down the street that they're outbidding themselves because the value is there. The problem always has been that there was a limit as far as the bank, so they wanted to spend more, that the
Yes.
bank just wouldn't give them more.
Yeah.
Um, and because the banks don't recognize, the people do, the banks don't.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'm hoping to have a conversation with an appraiser at some point, because I want to kind of debunk some of the myths around
Yeah.
what adds value and what doesn't, according to an appraiser. But I also really want to see, when it comes to a really unique property, where do you begin? Because I run into this as a realtor all the time. If a house is on a really, if it's a house that looks like all the other houses, but it's on 3 acres or it's on 10 acres, how do you value that? You're posed with a challenge. You can't just go based on square feet anymore. So there are these niche kind of bubbles for if it's this kind of house, how do we price it? And I'd love to unpack that more.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I don't want to take too much of your time. We've been going for almost an hour, but I could talk to you forever. So
I
you built
know, me too.
you built a 4-bedroom house. How many bathrooms?
Two.
2 bathrooms. And you've got a kitchen and you're
Yes.
2-story and you have walls of glass. And I think your house is like tucked away. It looked like, I think based on the photo in your book, and I could be making that up, but it looks like, you're
It's
surrounded
actually,
by. Oh, go ahead.
well, it's a regular neighborhood actually. There's
Oh,
neighbors on either
really?
side, but it's designed to provide privacy and feel
Wow.
like you're actually in freewheeling nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Again, another thing that blows my mind, because yes, when I look at the picture, it doesn't look that way at all. So obviously, your house was built 7 years ago now. 2024 was built 2017. What did you build your house for, when focusing more on the design than the square footage?
Yes. So I can only tell you that. So between you and me, we can't make this public. But so my we we spend like $192,000, I feel like, on 1,700 square feet. It's like $120
Wow.
a square foot. That was hard cost. Um,
Yes.
the builder might charge you 20%, but um, I could not repeat that. Um,
Right.
Today, actually, I tell my clients that they have to consider at a minimum $400 a square foot. Um,
Wow.
the prices have just construction prices through the pandemic have roughly increased somewhere between 1.1, 1.5, 1.7. Some things doubled in price. Numbers have really increased.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's for me. So I tell my clients it's $400 a square foot and upwards from there. I'm very sorry. And that's simply working, doing a custom well
Mm-hmm.
crafted home.
Yes.
And I think the kind of run of the mill houses that are being pumped out um, cost $200 a square foot, and the housing market doesn't really. It's hard to buy homes or sell homes at that cost, at that price.
Yes. Yeah.
You can still find homes for far less than that, and so it's hard for builders to build, which again forces them to build big homes, empty calories essentially.
Yes.
One still is one kitchen, one heating and cooling system, one roof, but they squeeze in all of these empty rooms and bigger bedrooms and bonus rooms just to have these more square feet for this to make sense.
Yeah.
Cheap square feet. And that's so they're forced to kind of do all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's challenging in a way because I mean, it makes it very clear to a certain extent, at least where we are right now, in terms of what the financial landscape looks like and building landscape looks like, that it does make it feel like this is only for somebody who has the money in their pocket and can really afford to do it. Granted, somebody who has
Um,
600, 650, they could build something instead of buying it and have a great home, building it, as you're saying, with more richness versus more space. But it does feel like, okay, so then for the person who has 250,000, three hundred
yes.
thousand, where does that leave them? And
Yes.
it's either in a really small place or, yeah.
Yeah, which is and I say that at the very beginning of my book is that so, and we already said in our conversation here that even $5 makes a difference if you spend it
Yes.
on the right kind of stuff. And so I say at the beginning of my book that single family homes are the worst kind of outlet to create a housing unit, if you will. There are way
Hmm.
better ways, way more cost efficient ways to create beautiful living around environments. And
Yes.
I spent some good amount in Asheville, beautiful downtown. I kind of evoke the sense that if you were to create more compact urban environments with condo apartment type buildings, with your offices next door, your grocery downstairs, everything in walking distance or public transportation, all of
Yes.
these pieces become so much more cheaper.
Right.
And there we would be able to provide a gorgeous home um, at
Yes.
$250,000. If you want to have a single family residence, everything becomes expensive. It has
Yes.
to pay for the road, driveway, utilities to get to this housing units. It's ridiculous. And yet
Yes.
all we pump out here are single family homes. And so the result is, of course, that they're cheap and awful. And so it is, of course, in a question of just perspective. I mean, it's
Yes.
$100 a square foot, $400 a square foot, $1,000 a square foot doesn't mean anything. Um, and so it's really the question: what is our income? What portion of that income can we afford and put towards a home, and a home that's beautiful and well designed? And how
Yes.
should that then be created to achieve that? In one country, it's a penny, in another, it's $1 million. It's the same difference.
Right.
And so the question is how we address it. And so my argument is that unfortunately, single family homes, I wish it wouldn't be the case because that's what I do on a daily basis. So I wish it could be what I do would be more accessible to more people. But
Yes.
unfortunately, it isn't. And I think so we're lying ourselves that we think that we need a single family house as our home. That shouldn't be the case, and that shouldn't be our only option. Unfortunately,
Yes.
it is, and so by default, we can only choose from crappy homes because that's the only way to make that work.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think that's spot on. And the realities are then we have multiple choices as consumers. You either choose not to buy because you don't want to buy, the mainstream box option, or you 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 buy the mainstream box option, or if you have the funds, you go ahead and you choose what you live in. I do think there's a third element, and I'm not going to get into it massively here, but I think we're not, and I think I can speak for you when I say this, that we're not saying, hey, if you live in a house in a neighborhood that looks like all the other houses or whatever it is, you need to sell your house and rent only or anything like that. I think that there are opportunities within your home to pursue the things to make it a space
Yes.
that where you can measure it by the size of your smile. But I think
Yes.
that you're doing it within certain constraints that you wouldn't have if you
Yes,
had built it.
definitely.
So
Yeah, I agree
um,
100%. I think the basis of this is still very simple. Good, just pay attention to the design of the stuff that you put yourself into. And yes, it
Yes.
can be, again, a paint, it could be a gallon of paint or whatever, entire new home. And real briefly, like one great thing that is being tried out here, tested out here in the United States is different words, phrases for it. One is I think called shared housing. And so what it is
Okay.
essentially is that you pool, five of you pool your finances together, and you create a multi-unit building. And
Yes.
so you own it. At the end of the day, you own it, like a condo, but you
Right.
go into it together. You design it together, and you create a community through the entire process. And then you live as a community. You still have your own
Yes.
place, but the community gets built in through the process automatically. And so you have the benefit. The old couple babysits your four children.
Right.
You clean or whatever. You water their plants while they're in the Bahamas, as a whatever
Yes.
it might be. And they're beautiful. So it's great. And so in those kind of instances, the cost per square foot dramatically go down, and so you have
Right.
more for better design, do it better and do it right. And so there are options to do differently, and make those finances work for different, for wider range of financial incomes.
Right. Well, I love that. I love the idea. My husband has joked before, but he was only half joking about buying an island with friends and living on it. So
Yes.
that feels very, very applicable there. Well, Toby, I will not take any more of your time, but oh my gosh, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Your book was like a breath of fresh air. It was very
Oh,
thought-provoking, and just talking with you about the ways in which we see the world and life and how we live and buildings and art and how they all intersect has been very refreshing. And I hope
I
it has
love
been
that.
for the listeners too. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I didn't tell people, but you have offices throughout Charlotte, but you have one in Charlotte, sorry, throughout North Carolina. You have one in Charlotte, one in Durham, and one in Asheville. That's right.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So I'm
So if
available throughout the state. Yeah.
yes, so please work with Toby, and I will link to your website. I will link to your book. I will link to your social media channels so people can kind of explore your work and your your way of seeing the world. But I've really appreciated this conversation and enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Oh, I love all of that. Thank you so much, Femi. I really appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me to go on rants here
I've loved every
and
single one.
explore. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you do. And your podcast is amazing. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby.
All right.
That's it for this week's episode. I hope it really made you think about what to demand, what to expect of your home. And if you're in the building process, pursue something creative. I will be back again in 2 weeks with another episode. Have a great Christmas.